Hey guys, welcome to the Deeper Bible Podcast. We want to go deeper than normal into the scriptures. Lately, we're studying the book of Revelation. It's at the end of the Bible, deals with ultimate cosmic battle. And at a couple points in Revelation, we get this imagery of a star falling from the sky or Satan being hurled down. It happens in chapters 8, 9, 12. The end of the book has the overthrow of Satan. But the question is, have we seen this in the Bible before? How has the Bible described, for lack of a better words, the biography of Satan and what he is, what went wrong, what the fallout is? And so we're taking a small pause in this episode from our sequential march through the book of Revelation to try to take a panoramic view of the Bible of evil, actually, and evil personified. And there's some tricky passages that we've got to look at. Sitting here with my friend Destiny.
Hey.
And excited to, I don't know if excited is the right word, ready
Yeah.
to talk about some stuff that I often ask you sort of what's your backstory with this passage. I've got a backstory with this
Tell me.
topic.
Yeah.
I remember growing up, and when you're a kid, you kind of latch on to certain things. I think I latched on somewhere to the idea that Satan was like heaven's choir director.
Oh, yeah.
Did you hear that too as a kid?
100%.
Oh, good. So it
yeah,
wasn't.
no, you are not strange for that.
Okay, so that's good. My mom was our choir director, and she wasn't Satan. At least I clarified that eventually.
No, Carrie's wonderful.
Heaven's choir director, super talented, super handsome and beautiful,
Yeah.
and decides I would make a better God than God. I want to be the boss. Recruits about a third of the heavenly company. They try to overthrow God. It fails. They're thrown down, and they're down here in Earth.
Yep.
And that's the backdrop.
I got the same story.
Oh, good. I'm glad to hear that.
I'm glad, and I'm also not glad, especially if this doesn't hold water.
Well, so we're going to look at that. And I think part of the journey with the Bible is taking certain starting places and saying, okay, what elements of that are biblical?
Yep.
Are there elements there that are not biblical? And I want to understand why.
Yeah.
And so that's what we're going to try to do in this episode. This idea of Satan falling. Of course, Jesus, we read in the New Testament, came down from heaven in one way, in a willing, self-emptying way.
Yep, that's Philippians.
That's right. Satan came down from heaven as well, but in a very different way, in a sort of rebellious, angry way. But where do we find that in the Bible? And so, as I mentioned, let's just start by reading some Bible, actually. So in the last episode, Destiny, we read from Revelation 8, verse 10, which says rather elliptically, the third angel blew his trumpet, and a great star fell from heaven, blazing like a torch, and it fell on a third of the rivers and on the springs of water. Then in chapter 9, verse 1, the fifth angel blew his trumpet, and I saw a star fallen from heaven to the earth. He was given the keys to the shaft of the bottomless pit. And then later on, we learned that the king of that pit is Abaddon, Apollyon. Seems to be a personified star. Now, one of the things we need to know is that the Bible comes from an era in history where there was really no distinction between astronomy and astrology. Astronomy is a modern science, the study of the orbits and stars and so forth, mathematical. Astrology was another layer on top of that to say, what are these telling us about human destinies? Are we seeing, is this a window into the gods? The sort of histories of constellations, and there's Orion and, seeing gods. And then also in classical antiquity, there was the idea that there's 7 classical planets. The word planet comes from a Greek word planetes, which means the wanderer. And so the idea is that whereas the majority of stars have regular orbits across the heavens, there's these irregular ones that have irregular orbits. And we know the sun and the moon are 2 of them, but then like visible through the naked eye are Mars and Venus, and I think Mercury, and I don't know, whatever, Jupiter, Saturn. I think those are the 7 maybe. And some of those were sometimes invested with personalities, like Venus is the bright morning star, was often seen maybe as a god or as a, there's this great scene in one of the Chronicles of Narnia where I think Eustace, who's this kind of
Oh, yeah. Yucky guy.
snotty,
Yeah. Snotty's a good word. Yep.
snotty kid, and they're talking about a star, and he goes, "Well, in my world, we know those are big balls of gas up there." And then the wise figure, I don't know who it is in this scene, goes, "Yes, that's just what they're made of, but that doesn't say what they are." And so,
that's good.
And so, anyways, that's a little bit of background. But then let's keep going. In Revelation 12, we read, 12 verses 7 and following. Now war arose in heaven. There's Daniel in the background here too. Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon. And the dragon and his angels fought back. He was defeated, and there was no longer any place for them in heaven. And the great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent who's called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. And I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, "Now the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have come. For the accuser of our brothers has been thrown down, who accuses them day and night before our God, and they have conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, for they loved not their lives even unto death. Therefore rejoice, O heavens, you who dwell in them. But woe to you, O earth and sea, for the devil has come down to you in great wrath, because he knows his time is short." Now, those who would read Revelation as entirely future might struggle to reconcile this as an account of Satan's being ousted from heaven in the past. The book of Job gives an account of Satan as the accuser, to use the language here, who has access, almost like a prosecuting attorney in a court of law. He's he brings accusations. Okay, so that's just in Revelation, but there's a lot of other places in the New Testament and also in the Old Testament. We still haven't seen the choir director bit and this sort of specially talented being. But why don't we divide and conquer here? Do you want to look up Luke 10:18?
Yep, I got Luke and 2 Peter.
Oh, good. Why don't you read it for us?
So Luke chapter 10, verse 18 says, "I saw the
Jesus
Satan."
speaking.
This is Jesus speaking.
Okay.
He says, "I saw the Satan fall like lightning from heaven," he replied.
Okay, so that's Luke. What about 2 Peter?
Yep. 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 4. "God didn't spare the angels who sinned, you see, but he threw them into the pit, into dark caverns, handing them over to be guarded until the time of judgment."
Okay, so that maps well with Revelation. One of the very important ideas here is that the Bible is not a dualistic framework. By dualism, the idea of is and this is a very easy way to make sense of the problem of evil. If you want to say, why is there evil in the world? One of the classic answers has been, there's a cosmic struggle between good and evil. They're about equally matched. And so when we encounter evil, that's just the dark side. But biblical faith says, no. There's a creator of all things. As we talked about, there may be a devil, but he's God's devil. And so if you do not endorse a dualistic idea, then you have to say, well, then how do we make sense of evil if God is ultimately Lord over it? Okay, we got one more to read here. Jude, verse 6. Or as he's more properly called, his name is Judah. He's, or Judas in the Greek. Whatever reason, the book is called Jude. Do you got it?
Yeah.
Jude, verse 6.
Jude, verse 6.
Okay.
"In the same way, when some of the angels did not keep to their rightful place of authority, but abandoned their own home, he kept them under conditions of darkness and in eternal chains to await the judgment of the great day." Okay,
so there is also maybe another piece of the puzzle, the idea if they didn't keep to their place of authority, that maybe they wanted more. One of the interesting legends, I actually don't know the source of this, but a quick Google search probably could figure it out, is that when God created the world and created humans, God tasked the angels to serve the humans. And the holy angel said, absolutely. And the unholy angel said, we're not going to serve these creatures who are so far below us with these ridiculous bodies and these ridiculous limitations. We're not doing that.
Well, I know you're mentioning this myth, but also it reminds me of a passage in Hebrews talking about kind of like, and he made them.
a little lower.
Lower than
I
the
think it's in
angels,
Hebrews
yeah.
2. He made
Yes.
Jesus a little lower than the
Yes.
angels for a time.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, but then now he's been exalted and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so there's this idea of a hierarchy.
Yes, that's what I'm getting
And
at.
some people assume sort of like, the cosmos is sort of a two-story house. There's downstairs and upstairs. There's earth and heaven.
Sure.
But who's to say it's not a skyscraper? Who's to say there's not multiple tiers of being?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, that's what the New Testament says, but there's some passages in the Old Testament
Mm-hmm.
that really feed into this, and I want to massage a little bit deeper here. In the prophets, there's two passages that are important here. Isaiah chapter 14. Let me read this to you. Isaiah 14. The context is Isaiah is a prophet in an era when little Israel and Judah are threatened by imperial powerhouses. And we know from the book of Deuteronomy that God has told the people in advance, if you walk away from the covenant, I will raise up a foreign nation. I will discipline you through them.
Mm-hmm.
But then that foreign nation will get arrogant, and I will have to punish that foreign nation itself. And at the end of all of that, I will vindicate the blood of my servants. That's the template. And then we see it play out. It's been said that Moses' future is Isaiah's present. So in chapter 14 of Isaiah, we get a taunt. It says, in the future, God gives you rest from your pain and your turmoil. No. You will take up this taunt against the king of Babylon. It's almost like a
mock?
like a rap
Mockery?
battle.
Oh,
Who is the guy who did the Super Bowl halftime show? Do you remember who that is? Kendrick Lamar.
Yeah.
Okay, so he's like in this epic rap battle with
Drake.
Yes. Yeah. And so it's like a taunt song. Thank you. Thank you for the pop culture reference.
Good.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's basically saying, you think you're all big and bad? Well, you're going to get it. That's basically the idea. The whole idea is, hey, guess what? You're going to die and you're going to get to Sheol, the underworld. And all these other people are going to be like, is that pathetic thing? Is that the king of Babylon, the guy who was such a big deal?
Mm-hmm.
You're going to be humiliated when people see you for what you really are. But then here is some important verses. So I'm in verse 9. Sheol beneath is stirred up to meet you when you come. It rouses the shades to greet you. All who were leaders of the earth, it raises from their thrones all who were kings of the nations. All of them will answer and say to you, you too have become as weak as we. You've become like us. Your pomp is brought down to Sheol, the sound of your harps. Maggots are laid as bed beneath you, and worms are your covers.
Dang.
Then, I know. It's a taunt song.
Yep.
Verse 12. How you are fallen from heaven, O day star, son of dawn.
Mm-hmm.
Now, O day star, in Hebrew there is Hillel, and in the Latin translation, Lucifer. How you are fallen from heaven, Lucifer, O day star Hillel, son of the dawn. How you are cut down to the ground, you who laid the nations low. You said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven above the stars of God. I will set my throne on high. I will sit on the Mount of Assembly in the far reaches of the north. This is like Canaanite mythology of Mount Hermon and the divine council of Baal and El and everything. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. But you are brought down to Sheol, to the far reaches of the pit. Those who see you will stare at you and ponder over you. Is this the man who made the earth tremble, who shook the kingdoms, who made the world like a desert and overthrew its cities? No. So, clearly written about a human individual.
That was going to be my next question. Are we supposed to look at this as like strictly about the king of Babylon?
So that's an interesting question. Some would say that Isaiah is taking an older story, an older legend about Satan's downfall and applying it to this king. Others would say, no, it's purely at the sort of political level. The Old Testament assumes that there is a parallel heavenly world alongside ours. And once you're aware of that, it peaks out in different places. Oh my gosh, horsemen and chariots of fire. as Elijah's like, or Elisha's like, don't you worry. Those who are with us are far more than those who are with them. Sorry, I'm jumping to 2 Kings. And he's like, Lord, would you open this guy's eyes? And it's like,
Right, yeah.
There's this whole realm. Okay. The way that I think about this passage is, first of all, at a certain level, I was like, wait a minute. Everyone told me that story was about Satan. And now I found out it's about the king of Babylon. So my Sunday school teacher didn't teach me that, and I'm irritated. But then I start to think the Bible tells the story over and over again of how true royalty, what it means to be God, what it means to be a real king or queen, is to lay down your life in love and service. And that's not just a human template. In the New Testament, we find that comes from the very heart of God. And so if that is the case, then the inverse of that would have to be what evil looks like. And so if this human king of Babylon is self-aggrandizing, self-promoting instead of self-emptying, well, that's exactly the reverse. And if that applies all the way to God, maybe it all the way applies to anti-God, or that which is opposed to God. I think here, and bolstered with the witness of the New Testament, that the Christian instinct to see here a portrait of ultimate evil is correct. Even if it's applied to a human king, it is correct in its instinct that at the heart of darkness we find that self-aggrandizing impulse, because it is the opposite of God. And in the prophet Ezekiel, we find a long passage, Ezekiel 28. I probably won't read the whole thing, but it speaks at length of a king of Tyre and a prince of Tyre. Let me just read you an excerpt. Your heart, I'm in Ezekiel 28:17. Your heart was proud because of your beauty. You corrupted your wisdom for the sake of your splendor. Boy, think about that statement. I'm going to read that again. You corrupted your wisdom for the sake of your splendor. You're so into your good looks that you've lost your mind. I cast you to the ground. I exposed you before kings to feast their eyes on you. By the multitude of your iniquities, in the unrighteousness of your trade, you profaned your sanctuaries. So I brought fire out from your midst. It consumed you, turned you to ashes on the earth in sight of all those who saw you. So maybe here's part of this idea of, beauty. It talks about, I placed you. You were on the holy mountain of God, in the midst of the stones of fire. You walked, and it actually uses language of Eden. I mean, Ezekiel 28 is an amazing passage. But again, here's how it begins. Son of man, say to the prince of Tyre, a coastal town just north of Israel. Son of man, raise a lamentation over the king of Tyre. So it's the same move that we see in Isaiah, where we're speaking of a human figure, but in mythological tones. And I don't think we have to choose between one or the other. And I'm using the word mythological in the technical scholarly sense of saying foundational narratives that help us give an architecture to reality, not in the sense of urban legends, mythbusters.
Right. You used a word, template, that as I wrestle with, can this map onto both Satan's fall as well as a human person?
Yeah.
The phrase, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, type of thing. If there's I think about the Adam and how there's kind of these recapitulations of Adam 2.0 and Noah and Abraham and these recapitulations of that template until we get to Jesus, who was really the one who didn't fail with the human assignment. What I'm not saying is that Satan is that directly as the opposite, but it's almost like there's this line of people that mimic his same hubris.
Oh, totally. Yep.
And that's what I mean by the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. And I even think Jesus used the phrase your father the devil. And it's that type of thing where
they loved him for that, by the way.
Yeah, there's a resemblance because the sin is shared.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, if there's a messianic line, there's an anti-messianic line. When we think
I don't think anyone has ever talked about that.
Antichrist,
truthfully.
It's an anti-Messiah,
Mhm.
and just like take Messiah and say, well, what happens if I flip that around?
Mhm.
And this goes all the way back to the Garden of Eden. What does
Yep.
the snake, that ancient serpent,
Yep.
what does he say? Hey, you want to become like God? Wink, wink. And that is where it begins.
Mhm.
And when Jesus is tempted in the desert, what does the tempter say? Hey, you want worldwide power? Because I can do that for you.
Mhm.
Hey, if you're the Son of God, wow us. Show us your flex.
Mhm. Mhm.
And Jesus turns down the very archetypal choice to self-aggrandize that Adam and Eve do not. They fail there.
Mhm.
So this is not a peripheral issue. This is one of the mainframes of the Bible's moral lesson. And
it's why in passages like these, it can reach into both places and say, like, yes, it's talking about the Prince of Tyre or the King of Babylon, and also maybe describing how the personified evil was cast down by God as well.
yeah, I guess
It's hard to find language for this without like
It is.
slipping into, I don't know, a space where it becomes too one for one, right? Where it's like this and that, they map onto each other directly.
But think about what Paul says in Ephesians 6. He says, look, guys, our battle is not against flesh and blood.
Mm-hmm.
Our battle is against the principalities. The Greek is so good here. It's like the sort of like the cosmic bosses in heavenly places. It's like the battle is bigger than you think, and therefore you need a certain type of armor to protect yourself. And so there's just the assumption. He doesn't think it's even necessary to explain this realm to us. He just says, oh yeah, that realm's real, and you should be thoughtful about it. And again, and we've talked about this before, this conversation in no way like negates, issues of mental health or psychological well-being. Or as a pastor, all sorts of people come up to me and talk about the demonic, and I take them very seriously. But often it seems that there are other issues at play that that medical care could be helpful for. So this is not
so that
an
is
either
to
or.
say not everything is, demonic or specifically like Satan out to get you, but that also isn't to say that Satan isn't at work in the world, just as Jesus said,
Yeah.
just as the New Testament describes where is it in Peter? I don't know if it's First Peter. Yeah.
Look, your enemy, the devil, is like a lion.
Yeah, he's like a lion.
Prowling around looking for someone to devour.
It reminds me of Genesis, when God is talking to Cain and he's describing like this like crouching beast, like he wants you.
Yep.
He's bloodthirsty for you.
Sin is a predator at your door. It is waiting. It has you under surveillance. It is very patient and very crafty and is going to devour you unless you rule over it.
Yeah.
But what's interesting about that passage from Peter, 1 Peter 5, is right when he talks about the devil prowling on both sides, the whole idea is humble yourself, therefore, under the mighty hand of God. Brothers, submit to each other. He's basically, here's this guy
of all the things to say.
Peter had used to be a hothead. Peter was Mr. I'm first in line. And he's come around to realize, A, that the right way is humility, and B, that the enemy, the Satan, is the self-promoting, self-aggrandizer. He wants to devour you. So humble yourself. I don't think it's accidental that those two thoughts occur together.
Yeah. It's very interesting. I think one of the frustrations that I think Christians often experience is that, they'd like to know more about, for lack of better words, the spiritual realm, spiritual beings that, are a part of God's created order. And I think the frustration is often, if we don't have a map of what these things are and how they do what they do, then how are we supposed to fight them if this is like a cosmic war? And it's very interesting to me that the scriptures have taken the approach of not just like delineating every last detail about how this works and whether or not there are hierarchies or, you know, if like senior demons and little demons. I'm thinking of like C.S. Lewis, you know, and his screw tape letters.
Right.
But like we're just very curious in that capacity, and I think part of that urge is like I want to know how to fight this. Can he read my mind? Like I've heard Christians say that. Can Satan read my mind? Does
C.S.
he know
Lewis,
like all of those things?
I got in a phase where like over a year or two I read everything he wrote, except for like a couple of random essays. But I think C.S. Lewis is somebody who himself underwent a real spiritual attack and knows what it means to say, "Oh my God, my mental apparatus is under assault." But he says something at the beginning of Screw Tape Letters, something to the effect of the enemy, Satan, and it's a fascinating book. It's like all written in reverse. It's about a senior demon tutoring a junior demon how to corrupt. Okay.
Right.
And he basically says there are two errors that the humans can make about us devils, and we're happy with either of them. Either they can become super obsessed with us or think that we don't exist at all. And he says, in that regards, a magician and a materialist are equally useful to us.
Yep.
So we want to push you. So the greatest achievement of the demonic in the modern era is to convince everybody that it doesn't exist. Well, how convenient is that? But he's just as happy for people who are sorcerers and witches and super into that stuff. It doesn't really matter. If I can destroy you that way, I can destroy you. I don't really care.
Or fraught with fear and just worried that the devil's always on their heels.
Right, exactly. And that's where you need the biblical wisdom. He that is in you is greater than he that's in the world. So there is an unhealthy, so to your point about curiosity, I want to understand this stuff. How does it work? That is appropriate. But it shouldn't become this sort of consuming curiosity. Interestingly, in St. Thomas Aquinas in the medieval period made a distinction between what he called in Latin curiositas and studiositas.
Oh, right. Yeah, you mentioned this
curiositas is actually a disordered pursuit of knowledge, whereas studiositas is the well-ordered pursuit of knowledge. So there is, and this is common for a lot of Christians to like get uber into this stuff. And I don't think that that's the Bible wants you to realize it's real. It's not to be played with. You're not to be afraid of it because he that's in you is greater than he that's in the world. We're telling you what you need to know.
And that's where I was going, was kind of the assumption then is, okay, if there's information left out, I have to assume that if this is God's revelation about himself, about the world, what I need to know is present.
Yes.
And also what I need to know about the limitations of what I know is also present.
Yes. Well, and that's just the problem, is that early in Genesis, and actually let's segue there, early in Genesis, there is often a transgression of the boundary between the creation and the creator, between the human and the divine. And it is that refusal to acknowledge the boundedness of our creaturehood that is one of the great sins. That's what happens at Babel.
Yes.
We're going to build something that actually goes into heaven.
The first question from the serpent was, would you like to be like God?
Exactly. And that brings up one of the most tricky, famous passages in this whole conversation. It's Genesis chapter 6. It breaks off from the genealogies, and it's the beginning of the flood story. We're going to learn, why did God flood the world and everything? It was so violent. Well, who made it violent? Well, here's the story. Genesis 6, 1-4. When man began to multiply on the face of the land, daughters were born to them. The sons of God saw the daughters of man were attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose. Then the Lord said, my spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh. His days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of man, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. And that this is a passage that has attracted enormous attention
And confounded many.
Indeed. Let me try to give you a brief rundown of just several things to be aware of in a passage like this. So there's kind of three basic views here. Clearly, the Bible seems to think what's going on is not good. It's leading up to the flood.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't just a neutral recording of like, hey, this happened. It seems to be labeled not good. Okay, but what is not good? There's a boundary being crossed, but and some sort of mixed race.
Mm-hmm.
The sons of God, whoever they are, having sex with the daughters of man, whoever they are.
Mm-hmm.
They're giving birth to the Nephilim, whoever they are.
Right.
And so the question is the problem cosmological mixed races?
Right, like angels and humans.
Angels and humans.
Or spiritual beings and humans.
Exactly. Yeah. And, some early Greek manuscripts translate sons of God as angels of God.
Mm-hmm.
The book of Enoch talks in chapters like 6 and 7, talks about 200 angels under the leadership of one archangel named Samias or something like that, sees the daughters of men, and they all say, let's go for it. And, oh yeah, we're going to get in trouble, but let's do it anyways. And that Enoch passage is very important, actually, for this whole conversation. It's worth looking up.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe the idea here is there's this heavenly rebellion
Mm-hmm.
where
a boundary transgression.
Yes.
Yeah.
Between heaven and earth. Okay. But maybe it's a religiously mixed race problem. To this point in Genesis, we've got the ungodly line of Cain and the godly line of Seth. And maybe it's the mingling of those two they're unequally yoked. Maybe that's going on. Or maybe it is sociologically mixed races. That is, one of the ways, in the ancient world, royalty often referred to themselves as gods.
Right.
Pharaoh is Ra, God on earth, and this and that. So the sons of God, maybe that's a way of speaking about the aristocracy, the nobility, who would make a harem or take the right of first night. I saw this in Braveheart growing up. This is what sets off the war, is that Mel Gibson marries a nice village girl, and the local nobility says, great, I'm taking her to bed the first night. I think that's how the story goes. But that's, I understand, in history fairly common. And so this is an abuse of power on a human plane.
Yeah.
All three of those options have endorsement. Of course, we don't see a choir director anywhere leading a rebellion.
Yeah, yeah.
One of the things that's two things that are fascinating. First of all, Nephilim in Hebrew literally means the fallers.
Oh,
so when we talk about the fall of man or the fall from heaven, the way you say he fell in Hebrew is nafal. Hu nafal, he fell. So the Nephilim are the fallers, just as the seraphim are the burning ones. Some of these, the meaning is more transparent in Hebrew. There's that.
Yep.
Secondly, in this passage, the pattern of sin is exactly what we see in the Garden of Eden, where Eve saw that it was good and she took. Just so the sons of God see that the daughters of man are good and they take them. And so that's and we see this over and over. David saw Bathsheba that she's good and he takes her. This is those three words recur at moments of sin in the Bible.
So is what you're saying that this story in Genesis 6 of the Nephilim, the fallers, this is potentially another among many rehashing of the story of the fall of fallen angels, including Satan? Like, what exactly are you saying here? How does this relate to our conversation about Satan?
I don't fully know, to be honest with you. I think that when you try to pull all these threads together, the Bible is clear. Well, C.S. Lewis himself in Screwtape Letters says something when he's trying to corrupt this human, and he basically says, oh, okay, if he's got to get into science, keep him in the pseudosciences, economics, sociology, that stuff. But for heaven's sake, don't let him get into real science like physics and stuff, because then he'll be forced to reconcile with the fact that the most real, deepest dimensions of reality cannot be seen. and when you get into, physics and that kind of stuff, you can't see it. And so there is that realm. And I think what the Bible is saying, its unified witness, is that what it means to be truly human and truly God is to live like Jesus in self-emptying, self-giving love, in personal restraint, the pursuit of holiness, of righteousness, of justice, and what it means to be diabolical, what it means to be made in the image of Satan is just entirely the opposite. To be self-serving, to be selfish, to respect no boundaries, to self-promote without any ceiling, without any sense of fear and trembling before your own creaturely limitations. That is what it. So I think that all these things work together to give us
helpful.
that picture. And I don't have to. So with all this, circling back to the beginning, I think that what I was taught in Sunday school is more or less correct. I never found the bit about a choir director.
Yeah.
I never found the bit about Satan saying, now I'm going to create a formal rebellion in heaven. But I can also see how cobbling all that together, it's not that far of an imaginative step to these kinds of things. And so it's not like wicked, and it's not anti-biblical. It just doesn't happen to be in the Bible either.
Yeah, that makes sense. One kind of loose thread here that I was curious about is a lot of people who are rediscovering this conversation and also words in Hebrew because they're exciting.
Petach, lamelo.
Are Hasatan, the accuser, and trying to understand how like is it that there are multiple accusers that could be different characters throughout the biblical story? Say, oh, it doesn't have to be Satan, like how we've been talking about him as this like specific being.
Capital S.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Could it have just been like you said, somebody in the heavenly courtroom making an accusation for the sake of whether they see Job as a parable or whatever? That's another conversation. My point is simply that is this a consistent thread throughout where when we see Hasatan, it's talking about a specific being, or is there room for potentially other characters taking on that accuser role? Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah. So I'd have to check. If I'm remembering correctly, there are a couple instances. So in Hebrew, the root is samech tet nun, and like an S sound, a T sound, an N sound. And formations from that root do appear in the Hebrew Bible in non-satanic contexts, or in context of just mere adversity, or of accusation. So it doesn't just mean accuser; it can also mean like adversary, often in a court of law. Now, one of the things that Jesus says about Satan is he says he is the father of lies.
Yep.
Lying is his native language. And so it's not just that he accuses falsely. And think about, that's a profound insight. Think about back to Genesis when Satan slithers up in chapter 3 and calls into question human identity. And not just human identity, God's identity. He impugns God. God's not being generous with you.
Right.
God's holding back.
Yes.
God is actually withholding everything good from you. Doesn't that bother you? Doesn't it bother you that he's kept you in a low position? Well, what a profound accusation. And so, the Bible comes out of a world that assumes words have power. And there hasn't been the great uncoupling, in the technical term for this is nominalism. There hasn't been the great uncoupling of language and the world. And so for someone to wield lies is powerful. One of the things when I first read the book of Psalms with any seriousness, one of the things that puzzled me, confused me, is that David, the other psalmist, one of the things they just rage about that bugs them so much are people telling lies.
Yeah.
And you're like, dude, what's the big deal about that?
Yeah.
Like, But
either mockery or lies, or they're asking, "Where's your God?"
Yeah.
But
the idea of misused language, language that is misdirected, that falsifies reality, that somehow there's profound evil there. If Jesus is the Word, the Logos, who speaks, he is meaning the real deal. The anti-Messiah is anti-meaning, is the great twister of significance, the great distorter. And so there's a lot of truth there. Yeah. Did that answer your question?
It was helpful.
I can't even remember what your question was anymore.
That's okay.
Do you?
No, I don't either, but that's okay.
Okay.
I think a good lesson here is that often we start these conversations with assumptions about where we'll end up, or about maybe the boundaries of where we could go. And then sometimes I think that predisposes us to end up in a bad spot. And I'm realizing here that, like, though I was kind of pushing for, like, okay, so is that talking about Satan or is that not talking about Satan? And, is this passage directly about, this guy or that guy?
Yeah.
Rather than just frustrating myself with that, you continued to kind of point us back towards larger truths that help position us far better than just answering the question and saying, like, oh yeah, that is about Satan and that's about that person, or it's about both of them. Rather than doing that, it positions us better to fix our eyes on the important thing.
Yeah.
Because the answer isn't always, what am I getting at? The answer is not always the most important thing, if that makes sense, in terms of, like, getting the specific answer.
Yeah. Well, often that comes down for us to two things: fear and control. I'm afraid of this.
Yep.
I want to know how to control this.
Exactly.
And then I want to move on from this. But the Bible just says, sorry, I'm not gonna capitulate to that. Now, in the book of Genesis, one of the guys who knew how to twist truth a little bit was a guy named Jacob.
Oh, yeah.
Yaakov.
Yep.
He was shifty. Now, the New Testament book, there's a New Testament epistle that goes by the name of Jacob, but more commonly known as James. But it's Jacob in Hebrew and Greek. Now, let me read you a verse from James. This is James 3:14 and 15. But if you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast and be false to the truth. This is not the wisdom that comes down from above, but is earthly, unspiritual, demonic.
I'm hard pressed to remember a time that somebody heard somebody gossiping and was like, that's demonic.
Right.
Like, we talk that way about a lot of other things, but we don't consider gossip or selfishness demonic. We're like, that's just.
I think the issue, well, here, I think what it's jealousy and ambition. It's envy. In fact, envy is huge in Jewish. In fact, I'm glad I thought of this. In the Middle East, in Jerusalem today, if you go to walk around the old city of Jerusalem, the number one trinket you can buy anywhere is the cross.
Right.
The number two trinket you can buy anywhere is the chamsa, the evil eye.
Is that, I was going to say, the little
evil eye, the little hand with the little eye in the center. What is that all about? Well, it's sort of a talisman. It's supposed to ward off the evil eye. What's the evil eye? Jesus talks about this in his passage about money. If your eye is good, your whole body be. But if your eye is evil, how can your body be healthy? You're filled with darkness. But in a passage about money, how does that even fit? It fits because the evil eye is seen as the envious eye, the selfish eye, the look that says that says, I hate that you have that and I want that. And the instinct is correct to see that as diabolical. So to your question of, like, is that Satan or is that Satan or is that Satan? James seems to be saying that when those attitudes in our heart and when they shape our relationships, when, God forbid, but oh boy, does it happen, they come into the church.
Yep.
That is of Satan. That is diabolical. And hence the only way to preserve unity and holiness in the church is the humble way of Jesus. Because you can try to be holy, but you ain't going to be unified, because all sinners got to go away. And you can be unified, but forget holiness, because you know what, you do you, and we're all just yay, yay, yay. There's no standards. But if you're going to be unified and holy, the only way is humility at the way of the cross.
Mm-hmm.
And so we can't become so interested in being able to say, well, there's the demon, and there's which, while we're ignoring the potential creep of certain attitudes of the heart that bear the hallmark of Satan. So,
Wow.
yeah, isn't this encouraging and uplifting? This is like K-Love. Positive and encouraging.
Oh, to hear Caleb talk about this one. Oh, fantastic. Well, I think it's been actually very helpful. And like I said, some conversations you go into it thinking you know what you're going to get out of it, and really you just end up repositioned in an appropriate way. And in this sense,
I almost forgot a big part. I'm sorry to cut you in,
that's okay.
but I wanted to end with maybe a surprise here. There is a theological, at least to me, I can connect a few dots. I don't know if I want to call it a tradition, that says, you know what the problem with Satan is? You know why he's such a sourpuss? This will surprise you. Is that he's not very funny. He doesn't know how to laugh at himself. He doesn't know how to take a joke. He's a very uptight individual.
Okay, walk me through that.
Well, Martin Luther, who knew a thing or two about all this, he famously said, if the devil won't yield to passages of scripture, and I'll quote the Bible to you, well, that doesn't work, make fun of him, because he can't stand that. If you start making fun of him, he's gonna bail. Another guy, Thomas More, who was Luther's contemporary, said, the devil, the proud spirit, cannot endure to be mocked. He just can't handle that. He takes himself very seriously. And theologian, this guy's a great theologian.
Which is a hallmark of pride.
Oh,
which
exactly.
is in direct opposition to humility.
Exactly. Yeah. Robert Jensen, theologian, says this. This is a little bit of a longer passage, and we'll try to put it up. He says, if one were to speak more mythologically than even yet I am willing to do, and talk of Satan as a fallen angel. So he's saying, okay, the biblical witness is a little fuzzy, I don't know. But he says, then one could say, here's how Satan fell. He could not take God's big joke on him and the other great spirits. And this is the legend I referred to earlier. He refused to join Michael and the others in service to those mere animals, those humans down there, whom God impishly and foolhardily proposed to elevate into himself, and in service to whom God proposed to assign the great spirits. What ails the devil is that he will not give himself over to be anyone else's object. Above all, as God gives himself among us, Satan's difference from God is unambiguously exposed. God gives. Satan can only suck reality into the vacuum at his own heart. God plays the great joke of sin and redemption on himself. Satan only has witty defensiveness. It is the sovereign test. When the voice in the night tells me, you are hopeless, is it said with a laugh or a snicker? The joke is so finely on Satan that he is, at the end, a sad figure. The gospel's laughter is our greatest defense against him. And so there's just I find that a very interesting perspective, that the idea of, among the reasons why I want to worship God is that he is a God that is okay with self-deprecating humor and saying, you know what, I'm going to become a manual laborer out in the middle of nowhere. That sounds fun. Satan would never do that. It's below his dignity. I'm not doing that. I'm
going to partner with created beings,
Yeah.
humans, to enact my will in the world.
Yeah.
I'm going to use maybe Paul's language, use the wisdom of the wise against them, and turn things upside down, and what they expect is not actually what I'm going to do, and I'll surprise them. And I think about when you were describing just how deeply frustrating God's response through the gospel is to Satan. I was thinking about every 90s movie I ever watched where there's a classic bully who, for over the course of the movie, just always had the upper hand and always seemed to have the keys to control over, the poor other kids, emotions and, pushed him around and had friends to join him. And then all of a sudden at the end, that poor little guy rises up and says, it's not just, I don't have to take this from you. I'm going to, come back with power. It's like, you're a joke, dude.
Exactly.
I don't care. Go ahead. Push me.
Exactly.
It's not even like a fight. It's just like, and he robs him. They rob the bully of what teeth used to sink into them.
Yep.
And then suddenly that bully is on their heels and they're like, oh crap. And they're like, no, take me seriously, and like you can see them floundering. And I just kind of see that as like how this all works together, where God's, just confounding the logic of Satan, which is like, well, I'm self-important. And if you're self-important, then you don't do what God does. God does stupid stuff. Why would you make that decision? I'm far more fit to make that decision or to call things as they are. And God's like, the joke's on you, buddy. And you know what? The people who love me, you got no control. Yeah. You don't have any teeth to bite with anymore.
God pokes the balloon. What seems all big just goes to nothing.
Yeah.
I mean, Jesus was a friend that people invited to parties. You can't, we don't know about Jesus's human personality all that much, but I'm sure he could have a good laugh.
Oh yeah.
And God seems to have a great-hearted sense of humor.
Well, I even think about, seems about left field, but Proverbs 31, where it talks about how, the woman who fears God laughs at the days to come. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of like this, it's not just self-assurance, it's this deep trust and connection to the trustworthiness of God that just allows you to say, like, I can take seriously that evil is horrible and that it really does weigh on our world. Yeah. But at the same time, I can look at it and just say, and so happy still.
Yeah.
That God is in control.
Yeah.
And you are nothing.
Yeah.
In comparison.
And I think what's adjacent to both of these things, it's Proverbs 31, and maybe we can land the plane here. The Christian's emotional world it does have a center point, and that's joy. Mm-hmm. What is joy built on? It's built on hope.
Yeah.
The reason you can laugh at days to come is notwithstanding the problems, I know how it ends. Yeah. I know that God is in control. Yeah. I don't know the answers, but I know one who does, and I have the freedom to have a great big belly laugh because it's going to be okay. Mm-hmm. The opposite of that joy on the satanic side is despair. Mm-hmm.
Hopelessness.
Is exactly. In fact, Dante in the Divine Comedy, over the gates of hell, it says, abandon all hope, ye who enter here. And as you go through the layers of hell, one of Dante's surprises is when you finally get to Satan, is he sitting in his lava jacuzzi? Mm-hmm. No, he's in a block of ice. He's frozen in despair. That's who Satan is. And so these are two,
well, and his future is locked in, so that makes sense.
Yeah, but there's just there's a thinness to the laughter of hell. There's a fulsomeness to the laughter of heaven, and one is reality, the other is anti-reality, and that's the great choice that the Bible puts before us. You live in a world of smoke and mirrors, a world of advertising and false advertising and promises and false promises. Are you going to align yourself with reality or the anti-reality? So anyways, maybe we should stop there. Mm-hmm. Thank you for this. Mm-hmm. This has been rich.
Look forward to all the conversations coming.
I think because in the book of Revelation, there's, evil has such a prominent role.
Yeah.
I think it's been helpful and important to pause and try to see, wait a minute, how does this tie in with the rest of the Bible's witness here? Mm-hmm. So hopefully that was helpful. Hopefully it's helpful for you guys. And hopefully you're living in alignment with reality. It's a daily choice. And yet God helps us if we just ask for it and if we're faithful. So yeah, we'll just end there. No promos. God bless you. As the ancient rabbis say, shalom. Bye-bye.